The land was parched, cracked open like the skin of something long dead, stretching beneath a sky that seemed determined to burn everything left alive. On the edge of that emptiness stood Hannah Moore's ranch, battered and lonely, a place clinging to survival by the thinnest of threads. She had already buried her husband the winter before, buried him quickly, as the fever had demanded, and since then she had learned the silence of the prairie was louder than any church bell or funeral hymn. The silence told her the truth. The town had forgotten him, and it had nearly forgotten her too. But this silence was not empty. It held eyes, whispers, stories carved into every gust of wind about what lurked beyond the mesquite trees. Stories of raids, of farms burned black, of children snatched into the night, stories of the Apache. And then, on one blistering afternoon, Hannah saw him. At first, she thought it was nothing but rags abandoned in the dust. But as she stepped closer, her breath caught in her chest. A man lay there, half conscious, his chest rising shallowly, blood darkening the earth beneath him, his hair tangled, his face hidden in shadow, and around his neck, beads and a feather. Apache. Her heart hammered. Every sermon, every warning, every curse spoken in town thundered back into her skull. She should have turned away. She should have left him to bleed into the soil. But when his body shifted, when a groan of pain rasped from his lips, she found herself walking to the barn, fetching a tin cup, filling it with the last of her well water, the water she desperately needed to survive. And she returned to the wounded man. She knelt, trembling, and raised his head. His eyes opened then, dark, wild, unreadable, locking on hers. He could have reached for her throat. He could have cursed her, struck her, ended her life right there. But he didn't. He drank. Just a sip. Enough to tether him back to life. Hannah stood and walked away, heart pounding. She told herself she had done nothing more than give water to the dying. But that night, she could not sleep. The silence pressed in on her walls like a warning. And before dawn came, the earth began to shake. It was not thunder. It was hooves. Dozens of riders appeared against the horizon, silhouettes cut in firelight as the sun rose behind them. The ranch became surrounded, warriors circling like shadows given flesh. Hannah froze on the porch, clutching her husband's rifle, though she didn't know how to fire it. And then, among them, she saw him, the wounded Apache, the one she had saved, upright in the saddle, pale but alive, his eyes fixed on her with a gravity that pinned her where she stood. He dismounted, limped toward her, and raised a hand. He spoke one word in English, a word Hannah would never forget. She gave. He turned then, addressing his warriors, in a language she could not follow. Whatever he said, it softened their faces, lowered their weapons, and then, like ghosts dissolving back into the horizon, they rode away. All but one. The wounded man remained. He walked past her, past the house, and sat in the shade of the barn as though he belonged to the land as much as the stones in the dust. He did not thank her. He did not leave. He simply stayed. The town of Dry Hollow had no mercy for a woman like Hannah Moore, too young to remain alone, too stubborn to remarry. They whispered already, and when word spread that she harbored a wounded Apache, the whispers grew teeth. In the general store, in the saloon, behind the church pews, her name became a curse. Traitor, savage lover, witch. But Hannah knew the truth of what she had seen. This man was not her captor. He was not her prisoner. He had declared himself something else entirely. You saved, he had told her. I protect. And with those words, a fragile, dangerous bond was born between them. As nights passed, he repaired her broken fence, cut firewood, gathered water, even while his wound bled. He never asked for food, never asked to enter her home. But when she left 2 plates on the porch table, he waited until she ate before touching his. And when she blew out the lantern at night, she saw him outside, sitting beneath the stars, keeping watch. Hannah began to wonder if she had saved him, or if she had summoned something far larger, far older than mercy. And soon, that question would be answered in blood. Before I continue, if you felt the weight of Hannah's story so far, the silence of her loneliness, and the dread curling just beyond her fence line, then this is the time to join us. Subscribe now so you never miss these dark histories that the world tried to bury, and so you can stand in the firelight of stories that haunt us still. Because what came next would change Hannah Moore's life forever. One night, the quiet broke. Boots thudded against dirt. Torches hissed in the dark. Men came, guns and rope in hand, shouting for blood. They came for the Apache, but they also came for her. And when the door to her barn burst open, she realized too late. The nightmare had already begun. The night split open with screams. Shadow spilled across the yard. Men carrying lanterns, guns gleaming in the dark. Hannah clutched her useless rifle, her heart battering against her ribs. They had come while the world slept. They had come not just for him, but for her too. A torch flared, hurled into dry straw. Flames licked upward, hungry and wild. Chickens screeched as the coop erupted in sparks. One man raised a branding iron, its tip glowing red. Another carried rope. And then, stepping forward from the chaos, was Brody, the rancher who had circled her like a vulture since her husband's death. His voice carried in the smoke. I warned you, Hannah. You keep a savage, you'll burn with him. Before she could answer, The barn doors split wide. Takakota, she had not known his name until that night, emerged. He didn't run. He walked, slow and deliberate, like a storm that already knew its path. Brody raised his gun, but the Apache moved first. A blur, a strike, a cry of pain. The branding iron fell, the rope loosened, the night filled with panic. Within moments, men lay groaning in the dirt. One fled into the dark. Brody remained, defiant, fury etched into his face. You think you can scare me? He spat. Takakota didn't answer. He stepped forward, blood streaking his knuckles, and spoke one word. Enough. But it wasn't enough. Not for Brody, not for the town. In the days that followed, Hannah felt the noose of Dry Hollow tightening. Doors slammed when she walked by. Mothers pulled children close. A stone struck her shoulder in the street. And in the silence that followed, she realized something chilling. The town was no longer speaking. They were planning. And still, Takakota stayed. He repaired what the flames had scarred. He sharpened her tools. He left offerings at her door. A rabbit, a charm of feathers, a carving of a hawk. He spoke little, but when he did, the words lingered like embers. Home is not a place. It is a choice. For Hannah, that choice was closing in, because Brody had not forgotten, and the men of Dry Hollow had not forgiven. And when boots crept once more through the dark, when fire licked at her walls again, Hannah understood the truth she had been avoiding since that first sip of water. She had not simply saved a man. She had chosen a side. And when the time came, when the flames rose higher, when the gun barrels gleamed in the firelight and the shouts of men carried across the night, she would stand with him, rifle shaking in her hands, heart hammering, eyes burning, but unbroken. Because mercy, once given, cannot be undone, and neither can loyalty, once sworn. Takakota had promised her, You saved, I protect. And in the end, the prairie itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if protection was enough against the fire of hatred. The story of Hannah Moore and Takakota is not one you will find in church sermons or dusty ledgers of frontier history. It survives in whispers, in the kind of tales people tell when the wind howls too long against the shutters. A story of water given to the dying and of blood that nearly repaid it in kind. But above all, it is a story of choice, of how one act of mercy can tear apart the fragile fabric of a town and stitch together two lives in its place. And as the flames of Dry Hollow's fury closed in around her, Hannah realized something with a clarity sharp as broken glass. Love and survival were not opposites. On that land, in that silence, they were the same thing. The rest, the rest the prairie keeps for itself. Tell me, if you were in Hannah's place, alone, widowed, and surrounded by fear, would you have given water to the dying man, or would you have turned away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear the choice you'd make and why.